I am not proud of how undisciplined I've been for much of my life. Not in a loud, chaotic way that draws attention, but in the quiet way that slowly erodes a man's sense of himself. The kind of undiscipline that shows up in small decisions, in postponed responsibilities, in promises made to myself that I did not keep, in routines that I created with sincerity and abandoned with ease. From the outside, I looked functional, capable, perhaps even reliable, but inside I felt scattered, inconsistent, and often deeply frustrated with my own lack of steadiness. This is the kind of undiscipline that is harder to talk about because it does not look dramatic. It looks like drifting. It looks like knowing what to do and still not doing it. It looks like wanting to be a man of structure and strength while living in the patterns of avoidance. As a 40-year-old Catholic man, I have had enough time to see how this pattern plays out. I have watched how small lapses in discipline accumulate into larger failures of character. I've seen how days wasted in distraction turn into months of stagnation and years of unrealized potential. I have felt the shame that grows when you know you could live better, but keep choosing what is easier instead of what is right. Discipline, I've learned, is not about turning yourself into a machine. It is about learning to align your actions with the truth you already know in your heart. Without that alignment, life becomes a series of compromises with your own conscience. Discipline is not merely a personality trait, it is a way of relating to reality. A disciplined man is a man who respects the weight of time, who understands that every day is a limited opportunity, who recognizes that habits shape identity. An undisciplined man, even if he is intelligent and well intentioned, lives in a constant state of internal contradiction. He wants one thing but does another. He believes in order but lives in chaos. He respects virtue but indulges in weakness. That inner conflict is exhausting. It creates a low level anxiety that never fully goes away because part of you is always aware that you are not living as you should. For a long time, I did not call this undiscipline. I called it being tired. I called it being stressed. I called it being overwhelmed. Those words were not wrong, but they were incomplete. Beneath them was a deeper truth. I was not governing myself well. I was letting moods decide my actions. I was letting comfort override conviction. I was letting short-term relief replace long-term responsibility. This is one of the great dangers for modern men, especially in a world full of endless distractions and instant gratification. When everything is easy to access and nothing requires patience, discipline feels unnecessary until life starts falling apart. As a man grows older, the cost of undiscipline becomes more visible. In youth, you can waste time and recover. You can make mistakes and still have room to change. At 40, you begin to feel the weight of accumulated habits. You see which paths you have actually walked, not just imagined. You realize that discipline is not something you can postpone forever. Either you build a structure for your life, or your life will be structured by whatever impulses happen to be strongest at the moment. I began to understand that my lack of discipline was not simply a problem of willpower. It was a problem of orientation. I did not have a daily anchor strong enough to hold me steady when temptation, laziness, or fear appeared. I wanted to be disciplined, but I did not have a stable center from which discipline could grow. This is where my faith began to matter in a new way, not as an idea, not as a cultural identity, but as a lived source of order. Faith, in its deepest sense, is about orientation. It places God at the center and everything else in proper relation to Him. When God is at the center, life begins to have shape. Priorities become clearer. Time becomes meaningful. Actions acquire moral weight. Discipline becomes not just a personal improvement project, but an act of fidelity. To be disciplined is to take seriously the fact that your life has been given to you for a purpose. That purpose is not self-indulgence. It is not comfort. It is not distraction. It is to become the man you were created to be. For me, this realization did not come in a single moment of clarity. It came slowly, through repeated failures and quiet reflection. I would promise myself I would wake up earlier, pray, exercise, work with focus, and I would do it for a few days, maybe a few weeks, and then drift back into old patterns. Each time this happened, I felt more disappointed in myself. I began to understand that discipline built on sheer force of will is fragile. It depends too much on how you feel. Faith-based discipline is different. It is rooted in relationship rather than in ego. When I began to take prayer seriously again, not as a duty but as a grounding practice, something subtle started to change. I was no longer trying to be disciplined just to prove something to myself. I was trying to be faithful. That shift matters. Fidelity has a depth that self-improvement lacks. It connects you to something larger than your moods. It gives you a reason to show up even when you do not feel motivated. This is where the Rosary and the prayer rope entered my life in a more intentional way. I had always known about them, but I had not understood their power. These are not merely religious objects. They are tools of rhythm and focus. When I hold a rosary or a prayer rope, I am doing something with my body. My fingers move, my breathing slows, my attention narrows. In a world that constantly pulls my mind in 1,000 directions, this physical repetition becomes a form of discipline in itself. The rosary does not demand that I feel anything. It does not require me to be inspired. It only asks that I continue. Bead by bead, prayer by prayer. This trains something in me that modern life has weakened. The ability to stay with one thing, to not escape, to not scroll, to not switch, just to remain. That ability is at the heart of discipline. Undisciplined living often feels scattered. You start many things and finish few. You commit and then withdraw. You intend and then forget. Prayer, especially repetitive prayer, rebuilds the capacity for sustained attention. It teaches the nervous system that it is safe to be still. It teaches the will that it is possible to keep going even when the mind becomes restless. As a 40-year-old man, this matters more than ever. Discipline is not only about productivity, it is about integrity. It is about being someone whose inner world and outer actions are aligned. Without that alignment, even success feels hollow. You may achieve things, but you will not respect yourself. I am learning slowly that discipline grows best in soil that is watered by prayer. Not because prayer makes things easy, but because it gives them meaning. When I pick up the rosary or the prayer rope, I am not escaping from responsibility. I am stepping into the presence of God, and in that presence, I remember who I am supposed to be. Not a slave to impulse, not a prisoner of habit, but a man capable of choosing. This is not a story of victory. It is a story of ongoing struggle. I still fail, I still procrastinate, I still avoid. But now, when I notice myself drifting, I have a way back. I have something to hold. I have words to repeat. I have a rhythm that reminds me that discipline is not about perfection. It is about returning. That is where my journey with discipline truly begins. I have come to see that undiscipline is not simply a matter of weak habits. It is a way of relating to time, responsibility, and reality itself. A disciplined man treats time as something precious. He understands that hours are not interchangeable, and that days, once gone, do not come back. An undisciplined man lives as if tomorrow is always available, as if delay has no cost, as if consequences are always distant. This illusion is seductive, especially in a modern world where so much can be postponed. But slowly, almost invisibly, this way of living hollows a man out. He begins to feel as though life is happening to him instead of being shaped by him. I have lived that feeling. Days blur together. Plans remain plans. The future becomes a vague hope instead of a concrete direction. This is one of the quiet dangers of being undisciplined. You lose the sense that your choices matter. When nothing is anchored, everything feels optional. And when everything is optional, nothing is truly meaningful. Discipline brings meaning back. It does this not by making life rigid, but by giving it form. Just as a body without bones collapses into formlessness, a life without discipline collapses into drift. Structure is not the enemy of freedom. It is the condition for it. A man who cannot govern himself is not free. He is ruled by his impulses, his moods, and his fears. That is not strength. That is captivity. I have learned that discipline is deeply connected to self-respect. When you do what you say you will do, you begin to trust yourself. That trust grows into a quiet confidence that no amount of external praise can replace. When you repeatedly break your own word, however, you begin to see yourself as unreliable. That damages something essential inside a man. It makes him hesitant. It makes him doubt his own capacity to commit. This doubt then spreads into every area of life: relationships, work, faith, and even prayer. Faith is not immune to undiscipline. It is perhaps even more vulnerable to it. Prayer that is only done when one feels like it slowly fades. Spiritual practices that are not anchored in habit become occasional gestures rather than living realities. I have experienced this myself. I would feel a surge of devotion, pray intensely for a while, and then allow it to fade when life became busy or when I felt dry. This created a spiritual rhythm that was unstable. I was sincere, but not steady. The Rosary and the prayer rope offered me something different. They offered a form of prayer that did not depend on emotion. Their repetitive nature creates a kind of spiritual scaffolding. Even when I feel distracted, even when my heart is not particularly warm, I can still move my fingers along the beads and say the prayers. In doing so, I am choosing fidelity over feeling. That choice is at the heart of discipline. Repetition has a bad reputation in modern culture. We are taught to value novelty, stimulation, and constant change. But repetition is how deep things are built. Muscles grow through repeated effort. Skills develop through repeated practice. Character is shaped through repeated choices. The Rosary and the prayer rope work on this same principle. They repeat prayers not because God needs to hear them again, but because we need to be shaped by them again and again. As I have prayed more regularly, I have noticed that my inner world has become less chaotic. Not perfect, not calm all the time, but more ordered. When I feel the urge to escape into distraction, I am more aware of it. When I feel tempted to avoid something difficult, I can see that impulse for what it is. Awareness does not eliminate weakness, but it creates space between impulse and action. In that space, discipline becomes possible. This is one of the great gifts of prayer. It slows the inner tempo of life. Without prayer, everything feels urgent. Every feeling demands immediate attention. Every desire insists on being satisfied now. Prayer introduces another rhythm. It reminds me that I am not at the mercy of every impulse. There is something deeper and steadier within me that can choose. As a man, this is essential. Masculinity is not primarily about strength or dominance. It is about mastery of the self. A man who cannot govern his own desires is easily governed by the world. Advertising, temptation, and distraction all target this weakness. They promise pleasure, comfort, and escape. Without discipline, these promises are hard to resist. With discipline, they lose much of their power. I do not pretend that prayer has made me immune to temptation. It has not. But it has made me more resilient. It has given me a way to come back to center when I feel pulled apart. It has given me a place to stand when my own will feels weak. The prayer rope, in particular, has become a simple and powerful companion. Its physicality matters. It reminds me that discipline is not abstract, it is embodied. I can hold it. I can feel it. I can let it anchor me when my mind is racing. In those moments, prayer becomes less about words and more about presence. That presence creates stability. Stability creates discipline. There is a kind of humility in using these tools. They remind me that I cannot rely on my own strength alone. They are not crutches, they are supports. A man who refuses support out of pride often ends up collapsing under the weight of his own expectations. A man who accepts help, especially spiritual help, becomes stronger in a deeper way. Discipline, I am learning, is not about becoming harsh with myself. It is about becoming faithful to what matters. It is about showing up even when it is not exciting. It is about continuing even when the emotional reward is absent. That kind of steadiness builds a life that can be trusted. This is not a transformation that happens quickly. It is slow, often frustrating, and sometimes discouraging. But it is real. I see it in small ways, in how I use my time, in how I approach prayer, in how I respond to temptation. I am still undisciplined in many areas, but I'm no longer drifting without direction. I have a path now, and that makes all the difference. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from being undisciplined, and it is different from physical tiredness. It is the weariness of always negotiating with yourself. Every small decision becomes a debate. Should I work or should I rest? Should I pray or should I scroll? Should I do what I planned or what feels easier right now? When this internal argument happens all day long, the mind becomes heavy. A disciplined life removes much of this friction. Decisions become simpler because they are already made. Habits carry you when motivation is low. Structure replaces constant choice, and in that replacement, peace quietly grows. I used to think that discipline meant becoming rigid, that it would take away spontaneity and joy. What I have found instead is that undiscipline steals far more joy than discipline ever could. When you are undisciplined, you're always slightly behind your own life. You feel guilty when you rest because you have not done what you should. You feel anxious when you work because you have procrastinated. There is no clean space in which to enjoy either effort or rest. Discipline creates that clean space. It allows work to be focused and rest to be genuine. Faith plays a central role in this. Without a higher purpose, discipline can easily become a form of self-obsession. You start optimizing your life in a way that revolves around performance, image, or achievement. That kind of discipline eventually becomes exhausting because it is never enough. Faith redirects discipline towards something deeper. It becomes an offering. My effort is not just for me. It is part of a life lived before God. That gives even small acts a sense of dignity. The Rosary has helped me, especially in moments when I feel overwhelmed, when everything feels too much, when my thoughts spiral, when I feel tempted to escape into distraction. I pick it up. The repetition creates a gentle barrier between me and the chaos. It slows me down. It reminds me that I do not have to solve everything at once. I only have to take the next bead, say the next prayer, breathe the next breath. This may seem simple, but simplicity is powerful. The modern world is complex, noisy, and constantly demanding attention. A simple spiritual practice becomes a form of resistance. It says that not everything gets access to my mind. It says that there is a center that I protect. Undisciplined living often means that everything gets access. Every notification, every urge, every distraction pulls at you. Over time, this erodes the capacity for depth. You become shallow not because you lack intelligence, but because you lack stillness. Prayer restores stillness. From stillness, discipline can grow. As I reflect on my own life, I see how many of my problems were not caused by external circumstances, but by internal disorder. I reacted instead of choosing. I drifted instead of directing. Faith did not remove my problems, but it gave me a framework in which to face them. Discipline is part of that framework. There is a kind of courage required to be disciplined. It is not the courage of dramatic action, but the courage of consistency. It is the courage to show up when no one is watching. It is the courage to resist the easy escape. It is the courage to be faithful to small things. This kind of courage is quiet, but it builds a life that can withstand pressure. The prayer rope has become a symbol of that courage for me. It is simple, almost austere. It does not entertain. It does not impress. It simply invites me to return to God again and again. Each knot is a choice. Each prayer is a small act of alignment. Over time, these small acts accumulate. They become a rhythm. They become a way of being. I am still learning. I am still often tempted to choose comfort over commitment. But now, when I feel that pull, I have something to hold on to. I have a practice that brings me back. That makes all the difference. One of the most difficult things for me to accept has been that discipline cannot be built on intensity alone. I used to believe that if I just felt strongly enough, if I was inspired enough, if I reached some emotional turning point, discipline would suddenly become easy. What actually happened was that I would surge for a short time and then collapse back into old habits. This cycle was discouraging. It made me feel as though I was incapable of real change. Over time, I learned that discipline grows not from emotional peaks, but from steady, repeated choices made in ordinary moments. Faith has helped me understand this. The spiritual life is not about constant ecstasy. It is about fidelity in dryness. Prayer does not always feel powerful. Often it feels empty. The rosary can feel monotonous. The prayer rope can feel dull. But continuing anyway is precisely what trains the will. This is the same principle that builds discipline in every area of life. You do not become disciplined because you feel motivated. You become disciplined because you continue when motivation fades. There is something deeply masculine about this kind of endurance. It is not flashy. It is not visible to others. But it builds a core of strength that cannot be taken away. A man who has learned to persist quietly becomes unshakable in a way that external confidence can never match. Undiscipline, on the other hand, makes a man fragile. He is easily derailed by discomfort. He avoids difficulty. He looks for relief instead of growth. Over time, this weakens not only his habits, but his identity. He begins to see himself as someone who gives up. That self-image then reinforces the behavior. This is how people become trapped in cycles of mediocrity. Prayer interrupts this cycle, not because it removes difficulty, but because it reframes it. When I pray, I am reminded that my struggles are not meaningless. They are part of a larger story. This gives me the courage to keep going even when I feel tired or discouraged. The Rosary, in particular, connects me to a long tradition of people who have struggled and persevered. I am not alone in this. I am part of something larger than my own weakness. That sense of belonging strengthens discipline. It gives me a reason to continue that is not based solely on my own willpower. As I integrate prayer more deeply into my daily life, I notice that my reactions become less extreme. I am less pulled by every impulse. I am more able to pause. That pause is where freedom lives. Discipline is simply the ability to use that pause wisely. There is still a part of me that resists this, a part that wants things to be easy, a part that wants to avoid effort. But I am learning not to let that part rule my life. Through prayer, I can acknowledge it without obeying it. That is a small but profound victory. I am not trying to become a perfect man. I am trying to become a faithful one. Faithfulness in small things builds discipline. Discipline builds strength. Strength builds freedom. This is the path I am walking now, slowly, imperfectly, but sincerely. As I look at my life now, I do not see a man who has conquered his weaknesses. I see a man who has finally stopped pretending that he can conquer them alone. That shift has changed everything. Discipline is no longer a performance. It is a relationship. It is the way I respond day after day to the presence of God in my life. When I was younger, I believed that being disciplined meant being in control. I wanted to master myself through force. I wanted to dominate my own habits, the way the world tells men to dominate everything else. What I found instead was that this kind of discipline is brittle. It works when you feel strong and collapses when you feel weak. Faith introduces a different kind of strength. It is quieter, more patient, and far more durable. The rosary and the prayer rope have become small anchors in a large and often turbulent inner sea. They remind me that discipline does not have to be complicated. It has to be faithful. It has to be embodied. It has to be returned to again and again. Even on days when I fail, the beads are still there. The prayers are still there. God is still there. That constancy is what slowly reshapes a man. I have also come to see how undiscipline is connected to fear. We avoid what we fear. We procrastinate because we are afraid of failing. We distract ourselves because we are afraid of facing our own limitations. Discipline is, in many ways, a form of courage. It is the courage to stay present to what is difficult. Prayer gives me the strength to find that courage. There are still many areas of my life that need more structure, more clarity, more consistency. But now, I approach them with humility rather than despair. I no longer expect myself to transform overnight. I expect myself to return, to try again, to place one foot in front of the other. That is what the Rosary teaches me. One bead at a time, one prayer at a time, one choice at a time. This is how I am dealing with being undisciplined as a 40-year-old Catholic man. Not through heroic effort, not through self-hatred, but through steady, imperfect, faithful practice, through prayer, through patience, through a growing willingness to let God bring order into the places where I once lived in chaos. I do not know where this path will lead in the end, but I know that it is a path worth walking. And for the first time in a long time, I am not running from it. Amen.